Next is Tom O'Brien, and Tom will tell us a little bit about what he's been doing at MedTrans. It was a major conference that he helped organize last February. He'll be talking a little bit about
as if we didn't have enough bad news already about jobs. I want to talk about the challenge from a different perspective, which is potential concerns we have about capacity constraints on the educational service provider side when it comes to workforce development in general and goods movement in particular. As Elizabeth mentioned, I'm the Director of Research for the Center for International Trade and Transportation at Cal State Long Beach, and also the Associate Director of Long Beach Programs for the MedTrans Transportation Center, which is a partnership of USC and Cal State Long Beach. And I do this by way of sort of introducing credentials and talking about the way we broadly define workforce development in the university. It's to say that it's not, often when we talk about workforce development, we often think about professional development, but I think we need to consider that what we do in training undergraduates and graduate students and making sure that we bring people in from high schools prepared to address all of the workforce challenges in goods movement, that's something that the two-year community colleges and four-year universities play a critical role in. Between USC and Cal State Long Beach, we have a market for our services of over 70,000 students involved in a host of traditional undergraduate and graduate programs in planning and engineering that service the goods movement industry, but also at CITT we're actively engaged in non-traditional college programs, certificate programs that try to respond to industry-driven needs in global logistics, in marine terminal operations, and that sort of thing. And there's a number of key workforce challenges that we know that we're going to be addressing. And you heard some of the problems in the short term about jobs lost. I'm going to suggest that over the long term, we may have the reverse problem, right? We've got 40 to 50% of the transportation workforce retiring in the next 10 years, great attrition from within the public sector as well. Fewer people going into the fields that have traditionally fed transportation and goods movement industry, partly because of competition for workers from other industries, partly because of the challenges of reaching California's new population, right? The other issue that we're going to need to contend with is changes in demographics, in birth rates and the availability of students to draw from to fill the jobs that are going to be needed to do the work. Anywhere from on the docks to building the infrastructure to planning for that infrastructure, right? So the annual rates of labor force growth rate are actually projected to nearly plateau within the next 10 years, which means that we're not only going to have a challenge of finding the right people, but we're also going to have to make sure that they have the right skills for the jobs that are available to them, right? And one of the challenges that we have currently is that the traditional STEM programs, so that the science and technology and the math programs, we're not doing as good a job in the U.S. of keeping up with other countries in educating young people. Part of the research I'm doing is trying to understand why that's the case, and we've learned a lot about what the problems are and where we need to improve. For example, making sure that students in grade school and high schools begin to see transportation as a career. So when they get to a two-year college or a four-year university, they understand that there are options available to them more than just driving a bus or building bridges, which is what we're hearing that they understand transportation employment to be. And they know nothing about opportunities in the area of goods movement, and that's a particular challenge that we need to address. Now, that's the good news to the extent that we have a much better understanding of the problem. I have some particular concerns about the challenges that we're going to be faced in academia in responding to those challenges once they're addressed. Just an overview of sort of what role we play in the private and public sector universities in state of California, with the focus on the public sector here. Between the UCs, the Cal State universities, and the community colleges, we play a critical role in training and educating the next generation of the workforce. As everyone knows, we're dealing with cutbacks in state support for education, we're dealing with higher fees, with cuts in classes and research funding, faculty positions going unfulfilled, and all of this has a tremendous impact on workforce development and our ability to respond. And a couple of things that I think are particularly relevant for the goods movement industry, where we rely upon continuing education and professional development to keep people skilled for the jobs that are needed. Right? So we're offering fewer courses, larger sections. What this means is that sometimes students can't get into programs and it's taking longer times to get to degree status. So they're getting into the workforce later. There's a pressure to recover costs by filling slots with non-California residents, which helps with the budget situation, but it also means that we're not educating the California workforce in some cases. One of the strategies that you're hearing talked about is charging higher fees for quote-unquote for professional programs, which means things like engineering programs, which play a critical role in educating the goods movement workforce, meaning there's more debt for those students in those programs, which means they might opt out of them altogether. And then a particular concern for goods movement is lack of funds for students in non-traditional and continuing education programs. And we've seen a tremendous need for scholarships that are targeted at continuing ed and professional development, working in conjunction with industry, because that's often where you get the skills that are needed to do the jobs for goods movement. Now the good news is that there are some key programs and efforts underway that I think are trying to address this from both a planning and a financing perspective. There's a National Transportation Workforce Development Strategy in development. I serve on a planning committee for that, representing universities. It's a partnership of the U.S. Department of Transportation, the Council of University Transportation Centers, so the people doing the research, the people doing the planning and programming at the national level, and most importantly perhaps industry, because they're a critical partner in financing and in identifying needs for workforce development. And it includes all modes, which I think is critical. There are other couple of efforts at the national level. There's some hope that the new highway bill, whenever it appears, will have an increased component focusing on education and workforce development with some flexible dollars attached. There was the American Graduation Initiative, AGI, which was intended to increase graduation rates, which stalled, but there are proponents for that program in Washington as well. And then there's been a series, as Barry mentioned, of summits held around the country, with the idea being that if we can collect data and get better information on the issues and challenges, as well as the best practices in responding to workforce development needs at the state and regional level, and then we feed that information into the National Workforce Development Strategy process, we'll have a much better understanding of where the problems are and how we respond to them. 5 regional summits have already been held. Summits are coming up in Colorado, Pennsylvania, Iowa, and Tennessee. Our California Summit was held in February, looking at the unique needs of California. We did it in partnership with the Mineta Institute at San Jose State and Long Beach City College, and that was by design because we wanted to look at seamless educational opportunities that stretch from high school through community colleges to the 4 years. And we had a great turnout, and I think we did a good job of at least beginning to understand the problem in California and showcase what's already being done. To conclude, what the next steps are, we're looking at the planning for a national summit that will collect all of the best information from the regional summits. And part of this, what this does, is raise the profile of workforce development in Washington for decision makers, particularly those who are going to be involved in authorization or reauthorization, depending on how you want to define it. And out of that will come the next stage of the development of a national workforce development strategy. Last comment, one of the things that did come out of Safety Lou was a small effort to fund research in workforce development. I'm doing a portion of that looking at Southern California as a test bed for workforce development strategies. But there are parallel efforts looking at developing standards for a national workforce development curriculum in transportation, one that focuses on online learning and distance learning as a means to fill some of the gap. So there is good work being done, but challenges remain. And I'll end there. Thank you.